Okay, let's just jump right in. We're starting this explainer with a massive, undeniable crack in the Kremlin's economic facade. Look at this data. A shocking 1.72% inflation spike in just the first 19 days of January 2026. That is the highest rate for that specific time period in half a decade. It completely shatters this state-sponsored illusion of an economic miracle, and honestly, it sets the stage for a massive converging crisis as we move deeper into 2026.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to totally dismantle the popular myth of a resilient Russian economy under sanctions. We're diving straight into some fascinating brand new data from the Free Russia Foundation and an in-depth policy brief from the Bank of Finland, just to see what the numbers actually reveal about the structural pressures building up inside the system.
To make all this complex macroeconomic data super easy to digest, we're breaking it down into 5 quick chapters. We'll cover the economic facade, the budgetary crisis, inflation and recession, the tech sovereignty illusion, and finally, the breaking point.
All right, Chapter 1, the economic facade, reality versus rhetoric.
So, the official narrative claims that tight monetary policy has somehow tamed inflation. Well, the real data paints a wildly different picture. While the official stats agency tries to imply nearly zero inflation for late 2025 to keep the annual numbers looking pretty, real cumulative inflation is just off the charts. We're talking about everyday basics soaring. Cucumbers jumped 28.5%, and tomatoes went up over 17% in just a matter of weeks. The true cost of living is absolutely surging right through their official talking points. Now, what's really wild about this warning of a looming recession is the source. It's not coming from a Western critic. It's from Dmitry Belovtsov, the director of a top Russian government macroeconomic center. And get this, he's actually the brother of Russia's current Minister of Defense. When an insider with that kind of clout publicly admits a recession is possible due to declining investment, you know it's serious. And sure enough, business investment in the third quarter of 2025 shrank for the first time since the COVID crisis.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the budgetary crisis, depleted reserves and missed targets.
You can see the immediate, glaring problem right here. Russia essentially built its entire 2026 budget assuming they'd sell their Urals crude oil for $59 a barrel. But reality check? By December 2025, the actual price was sitting at a dismal $39 a barrel. Between Western sanctions, petroleum bans, and just a global oversupply of oil, they're having to massively discount their crude just to get buyers in Asia to take it. That $20 gap per barrel? It's leaving a gaping hole in state finances.
Because of those missing oil and gas revenues, which literally plummeted by 43% in December 2025 alone, Russia is now staring down a massive budget deficit. They hit 2.6% of their GDP. That is 5.7 trillion rubles. To put that kind of cash into perspective, it's a 5-fold increase from what they planned just a year ago. And remember, unlike a lot of Western nations, Russia is totally cut off from international financial markets. They can't just borrow their way out of this.
And they can't exactly dip into their savings anymore either. Russia's own finance minister, Anton Silyanov, openly admits their National Welfare Fund, their big pre-2022 rainy day fund, is effectively tapped out. They've only got about 3 trillion unencumbered rubles left, which is a measly 1.5% of their GDP. The safety net is just gone. They literally cannot blindly finance their way out of this mess anymore.
Which brings us to Chapter 3, Inflation and Recession, the Money Printing Trap.
Okay, I want to quickly decode some heavy financial jargon for you, because the reports highlight this as the secret engine driving their crisis, the repo to OFZ scheme. Essentially, the domestic market is tapped out. They don't have the cash to buy government debt. So the central bank does this magic trick. They secretly print money, hand it to commercial banks disguised as weekly repo auctions, and those banks immediately turn around and use that freshly printed cash to buy government bonds. It is, for all intents and purposes, disguised money printing.
To really grasp the sheer scale of this, just look at this number, 3 trillion rubles. By late 2025 and early 2026, the central bank was pumping over 3 trillion rubles a week into these auctions. They are flooding the banking system with unsecured cash just to fund the government's debt. And you know what happens when you pump trillions of newly minted rubles into an economy that isn't actually making more consumer goods? Yep, explosive inflation.
And one of Russia's top bankers, VTB CEO Andrei Kostin, absolutely hits the nail on the head here. Dumping trillions into the military sector creates a catastrophic cycle. You pay high wages to factories to build tanks and missiles, right? But those things don't end up on store shelves for people to buy. They literally get blown up on the battlefield. So the money supply explodes, but consumer goods don't. That is a textbook inflationary spiral, and everyday citizens are the ones footing the bill at the grocery store.
Let's shift gears to Chapter 4, the tech sovereignty illusion, failing to substitute imports.
So the Kremlin loves talking up this idea of achieving technological independence by 2030 with these massive national projects. But the Bank of Finland data completely cuts through the noise. Look at the numbers here. Russia's R&D spending has been totally stagnant at just 1% of their GDP for 20 years. They claim they're going to magically double it to 2% by 2030, but even if they pull that off, while fighting an insanely expensive war, they'd still be way below the global average of 2.6%. You simply cannot achieve tech sovereignty if you aren't paying for the research. And their automation goals? Honestly, they're pure fantasy. They want world-class robot density, like 145 to 230 industrial robots per 10,000 workers by 2030. But the reality check here is brutal. Right now, there are only about 21,000 industrial robots in the entire country. To put that into perspective for you, Germany installs more industrial robots in a single year than Russia has in its entire national inventory. They are still incredibly reliant on imported, sophisticated machinery. This utter lack of tech advancement, combined with those crushing interest rates we talked about, is suffocating the military-industrial complex itself. Sergei Chemezov, the CEO of Rostec, Russia's largest arms producer, bluntly admits their factories are operating at zero or even negative profitability. The state won't pay more for weapons, inflation is driving up costs, and boom, they have literally zero internal funds left to develop new tech or modernize their factories.
Which brings us to our final section, Chapter 5, The Breaking Point, 2026 and beyond.
If you take away just one single thing from this explainer, let it be this exact framework from the Free Russia Foundation. Russia isn't just dealing with economic stagnation anymore. They are staring down an unholy trinity. Number 1, a persistent, severe budget deficit from cheap oil. Number 2, untamed, soaring inflation fueled by secret money printing. And number 3, an inevitable, crushing recession triggered by sky-high interest rates and collapsing investment. These three crises feed off each other, making a way out practically impossible. You see, all that economic stimulation we saw in 2023 and 2024 was basically a mirage. It relied entirely on burning through pre-2022 cash reserves. Now that those reserves are gone, what's left is a heavily sanctioned country, completely cut off from global tech and capital, struggling with a collapsing ruble, and slapping massive taxes onto a private sector that is already cooling down.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. The fiscal bazooka is empty. The structural foundations of the state's finances are visibly crumbling. When this disguised money printing finally triggers hyperinflation, and they can't pretend the tech sector is self-sufficient anymore, how much longer can this crumbling system physically sustain the machinery of war? The data is loudly telling us that in 2026, the collision between economic reality and state ambition is finally here. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep asking those